The mountain man collapsed against the doorframe of the small cabin just as the winter sun began its descent behind the jagged peaks of the Colorado Rockies, his massive frame trembling with exhaustion that went bone deep after 3 weeks of trapping in the unforgiving wilderness of 1876. Clara Whitmore looked up from the letter she had been reading for the 100th time, her heart lurching at the sight of the enormous stranger who now blocked the fading light from her doorway. His buckskin clothing hung heavy with ice and snow, his thick dark hair matted against his weathered face, and his piercing gray eyes held a wildness that spoke of too many days alone in the mountains. She should have been terrified, a widow woman living alone in this remote cabin 5 miles from the nearest settlement of Timber Ridge. But something in those eyes told her this man meant no harm. He was simply a creature pushed beyond his limits, and her late husband Thomas had taught her well about the code of the mountains. No one turned away a soul in need. "Please," the man managed to rasp out, his voice raw from the cold. "Just need to warm myself. Can pay." Clara stood quickly, her practical nature taking over despite the flutter of nervousness in her chest. "Get yourself inside before you freeze to death on my doorstep," she said firmly, moving to help guide his massive weight through the door. He had to duck considerably to clear the frame, and when he straightened inside her modest home, she realized he stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed impossibly broad beneath the layers of fur and leather. Muscles strained against his clothing even in his exhausted state, speaking of a life spent wrestling with nature itself. The man stumbled toward the fire, and Clara caught a better look at him in the flickering light. His face was all hard angles and weathered skin, a thick beard covering his strong jaw, but she guessed he could not be more than 30 years old. His hands, large and calloused, shook as he held them toward the flames. "When did you last eat?" she asked, already knowing the answer from the hollow look in his eyes. 3 days, maybe 4, he admitted, his voice slightly stronger now that warmth was beginning to seep into his body. "Supplies ran out. Been trying to make it back to Timber Ridge." Clara moved to her small kitchen area without another word. She had been preparing to make herself a simple supper, but now she pulled out everything she had been saving. The venison roast she had been planning to stretch across several days, the potatoes and carrots from her root cellar, the precious flour and lard for biscuits, the last of her dried herbs. This man needed real food, the kind that would restore not just his body but his spirit. "My name is Clara," she said as she began to work, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been cooking since childhood. "Clara Whitmore. This was my husband's cabin. He passed last spring." The man turned to look at her, and she saw something soften in those wild gray eyes. "James Colter," he said, "I'm sorry for your loss, madam, and I'm grateful for your kindness. Not many would open their door to a stranger." "My Thomas would have," Clara replied simply, stoking the fire in her cook stove. "He always said the mountains were harsh enough without people adding to the cruelty." She worked quickly, seasoning the venison with herbs and setting it to roast, peeling potatoes and carrots with swift, sure strokes of her knife. The cabin filled with the sounds of cooking, the sizzle of meat, the gentle bubble of vegetables beginning to boil, the warm, yeasty smell of biscuit dough rising near the fire. James Colter watched her from his position by the hearth, gradually becoming more human as the warmth seeped into his frozen limbs. Clara found herself acutely aware of his gaze as she moved about her kitchen. She'd been alone for over a year now, and having a man in her home again stirred feelings she had thought buried with Thomas. But this was different. Thomas had been kind and gentle, a farmer who had dreamed of making a life in these mountains. James Colter was something else entirely, something wild and powerful, like the mountains themselves had shaped him into their own image. "You have been up in the high country," she said, not quite a question. "Yes, madam. Been trapping beaver and marten. Good season, but the weather turned faster than I expected. Got caught in that blizzard 3 weeks back." Clara nodded, remembering those terrible 3 days when the snow had fallen so thick she could not see her own hand in front of her face. "You are lucky to have survived." "Luck and stubbornness," James said, and she caught the ghost of a smile beneath his beard. "My pa always said I was too stubborn to die." As the food cooked, Clara set her small table with her best dishes, the ones with the delicate blue pattern that had belonged to her mother. She brought out her remaining butter, a precious commodity this far from town, and poured water from her kettle into her good glasses. This meal mattered somehow, though she could not have explained why. It felt important to do it properly, to give this exhausted man not just sustenance, but dignity. When everything was ready, she brought the food to the table, plate after plate of steaming, fragrant dishes. The venison roast, perfectly browned and tender, sliced thick and rich with juice. Mashed potatoes whipped smooth with butter and cream from her cow Bessie. Carrots glazed with a touch of honey. Biscuits golden and flaky, still warm from the oven. It was a feast, the kind of meal she had not bothered to make since Thomas died, and she felt a small spark of pride at how beautiful it all looked. "Madam," James said, his voice rough with emotion as he stared at the table, "I cannot remember the last time I saw food this good." "Then sit and eat before it gets cold," Clara said softly. James Colter moved to the table like a man in a dream. When he sat down, the chair creaked under his weight, and Clara noticed again just how large he was, how his muscles shifted beneath his shirt as he moved. He had removed his outer layers of furs and leather, and his simple homespun shirt stretched tight across his broad chest and thick arms. He bowed his head for a moment, lips moving in silent prayer, and then he began to eat. Clara watched as the first bite of venison touched his tongue, saw his eyes close as if in pain or pleasure or both. He ate slowly at first, as if savoring every single taste, every texture, and then with growing enthusiasm as his body remembered what real hunger felt like. "This is incredible," he said between bites, his manners surprisingly good for a man who spent most of his life in the wilderness. "I have eaten in restaurants in Denver that could not match this." Clara felt warmth rise in her cheeks at the compliment. "It is just simple food." "No, madam," James said firmly, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "This is made with care. I can taste it. Every bite is like someone actually gave a damn whether I lived or died." The raw honesty in his words struck something deep in Clara's chest. She suddenly saw him not just as an exhausted stranger, but as a man who had been alone too long, who had pushed himself too hard, who had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. She knew that feeling. She had lived it every day since Thomas died. "Everyone deserves to be cared for," she said quietly. They ate together in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the gentle clink of silverware against plates. Clara found herself eating more than she had planned, the food tasting better somehow because she was sharing it. She watched James gradually transform as he ate, the hollow, desperate look leaving his eyes, color returning to his weathered face, his shoulders losing some of their tense exhaustion. "Where are you from originally?" Clara asked, curious about this man who had stumbled into her life. "Kentucky," James said. "Came west after the war. Could not settle back into farming after everything I had seen. The mountains called to me, I guess. Been living up here for near about 8 years now." "The war was hard on many men," Clara said gently. She had seen it in the haunted eyes of veterans who passed through Timber Ridge, carrying wounds that went far deeper than bullets and blades. "Changed us all," James agreed. "But the mountains, they do not care about any of that. They just are what they are. I find that comforting somehow." Clara understood. She had come west with Thomas seeking a new start after her parents died of fever back in Ohio. The wilderness was harsh but honest, demanding but fair. There was a purity to the struggle out here that you could not find in civilized places. "You trap alone?" she asked. "Mostly. Sometimes I partner up for the dangerous runs, but I prefer solitude. People are complicated. Animals are straightforward." "That sounds lonely." James looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "It is," he admitted. "But I figured I was better suited to loneliness than company. Never met anyone who could tolerate my ways for long." "What ways are those?" He smiled slightly, and Clara was struck by how it transformed his harsh features. "I am too quiet when I should talk, too loud when I should be quiet. I forget to shave for months at a time. I track mud everywhere. I wake up before dawn no matter what. I cannot abide being indoors for more than a few days. Should I go on?" Clara laughed, a sound that surprised her. She had not laughed in months. "That does sound trying." "What about you?" James asked, taking another biscuit and slathering it with butter. "How did you end up out here alone?" The question sobered Clara, but she found she wanted to answer. "Thomas and I married young. He inherited a bit of money from his uncle and decided he wanted to make a farm in Colorado. We came out here 5 years ago, full of dreams about raising cattle and crops, but the altitude was hard on him. He had a weak heart, we learned, though we did not know it back east. Last spring he was working on the fence line and just collapsed. Doctor from Timber Ridge said it was quick, that he did not suffer. "But you did," James said quietly. "Yes," Clara admitted. "I did. I still do some days. But I made a promise to him that I would keep this place going, and I do not break my promises. That is a hard promise to keep alone. I manage. I have Bessie for milk and butter, chickens for eggs, a good garden in the summer. I sell butter and eggs in Timber Ridge, take in some sewing. It is not much, but it is mine." James nodded slowly, respect clear in his eyes. "You are a strong woman, Clara Whitmore." "I am a stubborn woman," she corrected. "There's a difference." "Not much of one," James said with another of those rare smiles. As they finished the meal, Clara brought out her last treasure, a dried apple pie she had made 2 days ago. James groaned when he saw it, and she laughed again at his dramatic reaction. "You're trying to ruin me for trail rations," he said, but he accepted the generous slice she cut for him. "Someone needs to fatten you up," Clara said without thinking, then blushed at her own boldness. "You look half-starved." "I feel half-starved," James admitted. "It is a hard life up there, especially in winter. But the furs bring good money, and I have nothing else I am suited for." They talked long into the evening as the fire burned low and the temperature outside dropped to brutal cold. James told her stories of the high country, of encounters with bears and mountain lions, of hidden valleys where the snow never melted and hot springs steamed in the winter air. Clara told him about life in Timber Ridge, the characters who made up the small community, the challenges of keeping a homestead running alone. She learned that he was 28, just 4 years older than herself, that he had a sister back in Kentucky he wrote to twice a year, that his favorite season was autumn when the aspens turned gold and the elk bugled in the valleys, that he had once killed a grizzly bear with nothing but a knife and sheer determination, that he played the harmonica but badly, that he had read every book he owned at least 10 times and hungered for new stories. Clara found herself drawn to this quiet, intense man in ways that both thrilled and frightened her. There was something magnetic about James Colter, a raw masculinity and competence that made her feel protected and seen in ways she had not felt since Thomas died. But more than that, there was kindness in him, a gentleness that showed in how carefully he handled her dishes, how respectfully he spoke to her, how his eyes softened when she mentioned her grief. As the clock on her mantel chimed 10, James stirred reluctantly. "I should find somewhere to bed down. Is there a barn or outbuilding?" "Absolutely not," Clara said firmly. "It is far below freezing out there, and you are still recovering. You will sleep by the fire tonight." "Madam, I could not impose." "You can and you will. I have extra blankets, and the fire will keep you warm. I will not have you freezing after I went to all that trouble to feed you." James looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion was clearly winning the battle. "You're very kind, Clara." She brought him blankets and a pillow, making up a comfortable pallet near the hearth. He thanked her quietly, and she retreated to her small bedroom, closing the door but leaving it slightly ajar. It felt strange having someone else in the cabin, but not uncomfortable. Just different. As she lay in her bed, Clara stared at the ceiling and wondered what tomorrow would bring. James would likely leave as soon as he was rested, heading back to Timber Ridge, and then eventually to his mountain solitude. This was just a brief intersection of lives, she told herself. Nothing more. But as she drifted off to sleep, she could not stop thinking about those gray eyes and that rare, transformative smile. Clara woke to the sound of someone moving quietly in the main room. For a moment she froze in panic, then remembered her guest. Dawn light filtered through her window, earlier than she usually rose. She dressed quickly in her simple work dress and stepped out to find James crouched by the fire, carefully adding wood without making noise. He looked up as she entered, and she was struck again by how handsome he was beneath the beard and weathered skin. "Morning," he said softly. "Did not mean to wake you." "You did not. I should be up anyway." She moved to her kitchen area, suddenly self-conscious in the morning light. "Are you hungry?" "Madam, after that meal last night, I feel better than I have in years, but I would never turn down breakfast if you are offering." Clara smiled and began pulling out ingredients for flapjacks and bacon. As she cooked, James tidied the area where he had slept, folding the blankets with military precision. Then he stood awkwardly, clearly wanting to help, but not sure what to do. "You could get water from the pump out back," Clara suggested. "The bucket is by the door." He grabbed the bucket gratefully, clearly happy to have a task. While he was outside, Clara let herself appreciate the domestic comfort of cooking for someone again. It felt good to make a full breakfast, to know someone would enjoy her efforts. James returned with the water, his hair damp where he had clearly washed his face in the icy stream. He looked more civilized somehow, though no less wild. The combination was intoxicating. They ate breakfast together as the sun rose fully over the peaks, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Clara asked about his plans, though she found herself hoping he would delay his departure. "I should get to Timber Ridge today," James said. "Need to sell my furs and stock up on supplies. Then I will head back up to my cabin before the next storm hits." "That is a long walk," Clara observed. 5 miles in this snow." "I have walked farther in worse conditions," James said with a shrug of those massive shoulders. "But I admit I am not looking forward to it." An idea formed in Clara's mind, reckless and unlike her. "I need to go to Timber Ridge myself," she said. "I have butter and eggs to sell, and I am low on flour and coffee. I have a horse and sleigh. We could ride together." James looked surprised, then pleased. "I would not want to put you out." "You would not be. I was planning to go tomorrow anyway, and today is as good as tomorrow." That was not entirely true, but Clara found she did not care. She wanted more time with this man, wanted to extend this unexpected connection. "Then I would be grateful for the ride," James said, his eyes warm with gratitude, and something else Clara could not quite name. They prepared for the journey together, Clara packing her goods while James hitched her sturdy draft horse to the sleigh. He moved with practiced efficiency despite his exhaustion, and Clara noticed how the horse responded to him, calming under his sure hands. Animals trusted him, she realized. That said something about a man's character. The ride to Timber Ridge took nearly 2 hours through the snowy landscape. Clara drove while James sat beside her, and they talked about everything and nothing. He asked her opinion on whether he should try raising mink for fur farming, and she asked his advice on dealing with a particularly stubborn cow. They argued good-naturedly about the best way to cure venison and whether winter or summer was the harder season in the mountains. Clara became acutely aware of his proximity in the close confines of the sleigh, the warmth radiating from his large body, the way his leg occasionally brushed against hers when they hit a bump. She had not been this close to a man since Thomas, and her body responded with a flutter of attraction she had thought long buried. Timber Ridge was a small settlement of perhaps 200 souls, scattered along the valley where timber operations provided most of the employment. Clara drove straight to the general store, run by Samuel and Martha Henderson, an older couple who had become her friends over the years. Martha's eyes widened when she saw Clara arrive with James Colter. The whole town knew the mountain man by reputation, though he rarely came down from his high country haunts. He sold his furs to Samuel several times a year and bought supplies, but otherwise kept to himself. "Clara, dear," Martha said warmly, embracing her. "And Mr. Colter. This is an unexpected pairing." "Mr. Colter needed assistance last night," Clara explained calmly, though she could feel the curious stares of the other customers. "I provided a meal and a place to sleep by the fire. We both had business in town today." James touched his hat respectfully to Martha, his manners impeccable. "Mrs. Whitmore's kindness likely saved my life. I was about done in when I found her cabin." "Well, we are glad you are safe," Martha said, though her eyes sparkled with matchmaking interest that made Clara want to groan. Martha had been trying to introduce her to every bachelor in the territory since Thomas died. While James conducted his business with Samuel, examining the furs and negotiating prices, Clara sold her butter and eggs and purchased her supplies. She tried not to watch him too obviously, but it was difficult. He commanded attention without trying, his sheer size and presence making every other man in the store look diminished by comparison. "He is a good man," Martha said quietly, appearing at Clara's elbow. "Quiet, keeps to himself, but honest as the day is long. Samuel says he has never tried to cheat or lie about his furs, and that is rare in this business." "I am sure he is," Clara said, trying to sound noncommittal. "You know he has a cabin up in the high country near Crystal Creek, Built it himself, Samuel says. Must be lonely up there all alone. Martha Henderson, if you are trying to play matchmaker, you can stop right now. Martha's eyes widened innocently. I am simply making conversation. But since you mention it, you are lonely too, Clara. Thomas has been gone over a year now. He would not want you to spend the rest of your life alone. Clara felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. It has only been a year. And you have mourned well and properly, Martha said gently. But life goes on, dear. Thomas would want you to be happy. Before Clara could respond, James appeared at her side. All finished, he said. Do you need help loading your supplies? They worked together to load Clara's purchases into the sleigh, and Clara noticed several women watching with interest. James Colter was not the kind of man who went unnoticed, and seeing him with Clara would set tongues wagging for weeks. As they prepared to leave, the town doctor, Edward Frost, approached. He was a widower in his late 40s who had made his interest in Clara painfully obvious over the past 6 months. Clara liked him well enough but felt no spark, and his persistence had begun to grate. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, tipping his hat, I was hoping to call on you this week. I'm quite busy, Dr. Frost, Clara said politely but firmly. Surely you have time for a friendly visit. His eyes flickered to James with poorly concealed disapproval. I worry about you living so far from town without proper protection. I assure you I am perfectly safe, Clara said, her voice cooling. James shifted slightly, and suddenly he seemed larger, more imposing. He did not say anything, did not even look directly at the doctor, but his presence beside Clara sent a clear message. The doctor took an involuntary step back. Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find me, Dr. Frost said stiffly before retreating. As they drove out of town, Clara let out a long breath. Thank you for that. For what? For standing there looking large and intimidating. Dr. Frost has been pestering me for months, and he finally seemed to understand I'm not interested. James glanced at her, his expression unreadable. He is not worthy of you anyway. The simple statement, delivered in James's quiet rumble, made Clara's heart skip. You barely know me. I know enough, James said. I know you are kind enough to feed a stranger, brave enough to live alone in the wilderness, strong enough to keep a promise even when it costs you. That kind of woman deserves someone who sees her value, not someone who wants to possess her. Clara did not know what to say to that, so they rode in silence for a while. But it was a comfortable silence, full of awareness and possibility. When they reached her cabin, James helped her unload and carry everything inside. As he set down the last bag of flour, he turned to her with obvious reluctance. I should head to my own place while there is still daylight, he said. How far is your cabin from here? Clara asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. About 15 miles north and up. It will take me most of the afternoon to reach it. That's a long walk. Clara hesitated, then took a leap. Why don't you stay another night? Leave fresh in the morning. I could pack you some food for the journey. James looked at her searchingly, and Clara held her breath, wondering if he could see how much she wanted him to stay, how the thought of him leaving made her feel hollow. I would like that, he said finally, if you are sure. I am sure. They spent the afternoon in quiet companionship. James split wood for Clara's winter supply, working with smooth, powerful strokes that made quick work of the logs. Clara watched from her window as she worked on mending, admiring the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the easy competence of his movements. He was beautiful in a raw, masculine way, all strength and capability. When he came in for supper, she had made a hearty stew from the leftover venison and fresh bread. They ate together, and the conversation flowed even more easily than before. James told her about his cabin, how he had built it log by log over the course of a summer, how he had a small stable for his mule and a smokehouse for preserving meat. Clara told him about her plans to expand her chicken coop in the spring and her dream of eventually getting a few sheep for wool. I could help you with that coop, James offered. I will be coming through this way again in about a month. I could bring lumber and spend a day or two on the project. Clara's heart leaped at the prospect of seeing him again. That would be very kind. It would be my pleasure, James said, his eyes warm on hers. You have shown me more kindness in 2 days than I have experienced in years. I would like to return the favor. That evening, they sat by the fire together after the dishes were done. James pulled out a battered harmonica from his pack and played a few simple tunes, and Clara laughed at his self-deprecating comments about his lack of skill. But the music was sweet in its simplicity, and the intimacy of the moment made Clara's chest ache with longing. "I have not felt this at peace in a long time," James admitted as he put the harmonica away. "This cabin, your company, the good food, it feels like home." "You could have this," Clara said softly. "If you wanted. A real home, I mean. Not just a cabin in the wilderness." James looked at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "What are you saying, Clara?" She flushed but held his gaze. "I am saying that you do not have to be alone, that some people might want your company, might treasure it even." "People like you?" "Yes," Clara whispered, "like me." James reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her cheek with one large, calloused hand. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Clara said, echoing his earlier words. "I know you are kind and honest and strong. I know you make me feel things I thought died with Thomas. I know that when you leave tomorrow, I'm going to miss you." "Clara," James breathed, and then he was kissing her. Gentle despite his size and strength, his lips were warm against hers, his beard soft, his touch reverent. Clara melted into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his broad chest, feeling the steady thunder of his heartbeat beneath her palms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I am not an easy man to love," he warned. "I'm not asking for easy," Clara said. "I am asking for real." They spent the evening in each other's arms, talking and kissing and making plans. James admitted that he had felt drawn to her from the moment he saw her, that her kindness had touched something in him he thought was dead. Clara confessed that she'd been lonely for so long that Thomas's death had left her hollow, but James made her feel alive again. "I will come back in a month," James promised. "I will help you with that chicken coop, and we will see where this goes. I'm not asking you to decide everything tonight. Just give me a chance to court you properly." "I would like that," Clara said, smiling through happy tears. James left at dawn the next morning, but not before kissing Clara thoroughly and promising to return. She watched him disappear into the forest, his tall figure moving with the confident grace of a man who belonged in the wilderness, and felt both sad and hopeful. The month that followed was the longest of Clara's life. She threw herself into her work, preparing for spring, tending her animals, selling her goods in Timber Ridge. But every night she thought of James, wondered what he was doing, hoped he was safe in his mountain fastness. She also faced the inevitable gossip. Word had spread quickly about the mountain man staying at Widow Whitmore's cabin, and opinions were divided. Some, like Martha Henderson, thought it was wonderful that Clara had found someone. Others, particularly Dr. Frost and a few of the more conservative church ladies, thought it was scandalous. Clara found she did not care. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt truly alive, and no amount of gossip could dampen her spirits. True to his word, James appeared exactly 1 month later, riding his mule and leading a second, loaded with lumber. Clara's heart soared when she saw him coming up the trail, and she ran out to meet him without caring how eager she looked. James dismounted and swept her into his arms, lifting her clean off her feet and spinning her around before kissing her soundly. "Missed you," he said against her lips. "Missed you too," Clara breathed, clinging to his broad shoulders. They spent 3 glorious days together. James built her a chicken coop that was better than anything she could have imagined, with separate nesting boxes and a secure run to protect against predators. But more than that, they talked for hours, learning each other's stories, sharing dreams and fears and hopes. On the second night, as they sat by the fire, James took her hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about us, about the future." Clara's heart hammered. "And? I want this, Clara. I want you, but I need you to understand what that means. I cannot give up trapping entirely. It is how I make my living, and I'm good at it. I would need to spend part of each year in the high country." "I understand," Clara said. "I would never ask you to give up who you are. But I could build us a better cabin here, closer to Timber Ridge, spend the summers here, help you build up this homestead, then do my trapping runs in fall and winter when the furs are best, come back to you always." Tears streamed down Clara's face. "That sounds perfect." James pulled her close, his strong arms wrapping around her protectively. "I love you, Clara Whitmore. I think I have loved you since you opened your door to a half-frozen stranger and fed him like he mattered." "You do matter," Clara said fiercely. "You matter to me. And I love you too, James Colter. I love your strength and your gentleness and your wild heart." They were married in June of 1876 in a simple ceremony in Timber Ridge, with Martha Henderson crying happily and Samuel serving as James's best man. Dr. Frost left town shortly after, unable to bear seeing Clara so happy with someone else, and the church ladies eventually found someone else to gossip about. James was true to his word. He spent that first summer building them a beautiful cabin on Clara's homestead, larger and sturdier than the original, with a real bedroom and a spacious kitchen, and even a small room that could serve as a study or nursery someday. They worked side by side, expanding the garden, building up the herds, making improvements to the property. In the fall, James left for his trapping season, and Clara waited anxiously for his return. But he came back safe in early March, his mule loaded with prime furs that brought excellent prices, and he swept her into his arms like he had been gone years instead of months. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Clara's first husband, was born in the spring of 1878. James was an attentive father, surprisingly gentle with the baby despite his massive hands and rough exterior. Clara loved watching her fierce mountain man sing lullabies to their son, holding him with such careful tenderness. "He would be happy for you, you know," James said one night as they watched their sleeping baby. "You're Thomas. He would be glad you found love again." "I think so too," Clara said. "He always wanted me to be happy." 2 years later, they welcomed twin girls, Rebecca and Sarah, who had their mother's delicate features and their father's gray eyes. James adored his daughters, teaching them to track and hunt almost before they could walk properly, while Clara taught them to read and cook and manage a household. The homestead prospered under their combined efforts. Clara's butter and eggs were famous throughout the territory, and James's furs brought in good money every year. They expanded into cattle and sheep, built a larger barn, added a proper smokehouse and root cellar. Neighbors began to settle nearby, drawn by the relative safety of the area and the knowledge that James Colter would help defend against any threats. James still spent part of each year in the mountains, but he always came home to Clara, and she always welcomed him with open arms and a hot meal. It became their tradition, that first night of his return, when she would cook him a feast and he would tell her stories of the high country while she fed him and loved him and reminded him that he had a home, that he was cherished. In 1885, their youngest child, a son they named Daniel, was born. By then, Thomas was 7 and helping his father with the heavier chores, while the twins were 5 and already showing signs of their mother's practical nature combined with their father's adventurous spirit. "We made something good here," James said one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set behind the mountains while their children played in the yard. His arm was around Clara's shoulders, and she leaned into his solid warmth. "We did," Clara agreed. "We made a family, a home, a life." "All because you opened your door to a stranger," James mused. "All because you had the courage to ask for help," Clara corrected, "and because we both recognized something worth fighting for when we found it." James kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, stumbling to your door that night." "Best meal I ever cooked," Clara said with a smile. As the years passed, their love only deepened. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, sick children and injured livestock, disputes with neighbors and visits from outlaws passing through. But through it all, they had each other. James became less wild as the years went on, settling into domestic life with surprising ease. He still loved the mountains, still took his annual trapping expeditions, but he was always eager to return home. Clara remained his anchor, the warm center of his world, and he was her protector and partner in all things. Their children grew strong and capable. Thomas became a skilled rancher who eventually took over much of the daily operation of the homestead. Rebecca married a banker from Denver, but visited often, while Sarah chose to stay on the homestead, marrying a local carpenter and building a cabin on the far corner of the property. Daniel, their youngest, inherited his father's love of the wilderness and became a guide for wealthy hunters from back east. In the spring of 1895, Clara and James celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary. They were in their 40s now, both showing signs of age but still healthy and strong. The homestead had expanded into a substantial ranch, employing several hands in producing cattle, sheep, and crops that sold well throughout Colorado. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked one evening as they sat together on their porch, a tradition they had maintained for years. "Giving up your solitary life for all this chaos?" James looked at her with those gray eyes that had first captivated her nearly 20 years ago, now crinkled at the corners with laugh lines. "Not for one single second," he said. "You gave me everything I did not know I needed. A home, a family, a reason to come down from the mountains. Love." "You gave me the same," Clara said softly. "I was so lonely after Thomas died. I thought I would spend the rest of my life just surviving. But you reminded me how to live." They kissed as the sun set, their love as strong as it had been that first night when Clara had cooked a hot meal for an exhausted stranger and somehow fed his soul as well as his body. More years passed, bringing grandchildren and new adventures. James finally stopped taking long trapping expeditions in his 50s, content to help manage the ranch and teach his grandchildren the ways of the wilderness. Clara continued to cook, her meals still legendary throughout the territory, though she had willing help now from daughters and daughters-in-law. In 1910, they celebrated their 34th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends. The small cabin where Clara had first opened her door to James was still standing, preserved as a testament to where their journey had begun. Sometimes they would go there together, just the two of them, and sit by the fire remembering that first meeting. 34 years, Clara marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. "Forever is not long enough," James said, pulling her close. Despite his age, he was still strong, still protective, still utterly devoted to the woman who had saved him in more ways than one. They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire crackle, and Clara thought about that cold February night in 1876 when a half-frozen mountain man had appeared at her door. She had given him a hot meal, never dreaming she was also offering him her heart, her future, her entire life. But she had, and he had accepted, and they had built something beautiful together. The years continued to roll by, gentler now but no less full. James and Clara became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, their love story legendary in the territory. People spoke of the widow who had taken in a mountain man and found true love, of the fierce trapper who had been tamed by a woman's kindness and a hot meal. But those who knew them well understood that it was not about taming or being tamed. It was about two lonely souls finding each other in the wilderness and choosing every single day to keep choosing each other. In the early spring of 1920, James Colter passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, his hand clasped in Clara's. She grieved deeply, but she did not fall apart. She had loved and been loved, had built a family and a legacy, and she knew James would want her to keep living. Clara followed him 4 years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren who told stories of her kindness and her cooking, of how she had made everyone feel welcome and cherished. In the end, she went peacefully, and those at her bedside swore her last words were, "I am coming, James." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the homestead they had built together, their graves marked with simple headstones. But their true memorial was the family they had created, the love they had shared, the legacy of choosing kindness and courage and hope, even in the hardest times. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind howled down from the mountains, people swore they could smell fresh bread baking and hear the sound of a harmonica playing badly but sweetly. As if somewhere beyond the veil, Clara was still cooking hot meals for her mountain man, and he was still coming home to her warmth and love. Their story lived on in the valley, told and retold by their descendants and neighbors. The original cabin was eventually converted into a small museum, preserved exactly as it had been that night in 1876 when everything changed. Visitors could see Clara's blue-patterned dishes, the table where they had shared that first meal, the hearth where James had slept that first night. Thomas Colter, their eldest son, made sure the story was written down properly before he died. He had vivid memories of his parents' love, of how his father would return from the mountains and sweep his mother into his arms, of how they would sit on the porch every evening talking and laughing like newlyweds. He wanted future generations to know that true love was not just a fairy tale, that it could be found in unexpected places and endure through hardship. The Colter Ranch continued to operate for 3 more generations, each inheriting not just the land, but the values Clara and James had lived by. Kindness to strangers, hard work, devotion to family, respect for the wilderness, and the understanding that home was not just a place, but the people you chose to share it with. Rebecca's descendants became prominent in Denver society, but never forgot their mountain roots. Sarah's line continued to work the land, producing some of the finest ranchers in Colorado. Daniel's children became wilderness guides and conservationists, protecting the mountain country their grandfather had loved. Each generation told their children the story of how it all began, of the exhausted mountain man and the widow who fed him. They emphasized different parts as the years went on, the romance, the courage, the faith, the kindness, but the core remained the same. Love was a choice, made daily. Home was built, not found. And sometimes, the simple act of cooking a hot meal for someone in need could change the course of 2 lives forever. The valley where Clara and James had made their home eventually became a small town named Colter Springs in their honor. The natural spring that fed their original garden became the center of the community, and a bronze statue was erected in the town square showing a large man and a small woman standing hand in hand, looking toward the mountains. Every year on the anniversary of their wedding, the town held a celebration. Families would gather to share meals, tell stories, and remember the couple who had shown them all what real love looked like. There would be music and dancing, and someone always brought a harmonica to play badly in James's honor, while the best cooks in town competed to make dishes worthy of Clara's legendary skill. The church where they had married still stood, and sometimes couples would request to be married there, wanting to start their lives together in the same place Clara and James had. The pastor would always tell the story before the ceremony, reminding the young lovers that marriage was work and choice and daily commitment, but that the rewards were beyond measure. Clara's recipes were preserved in a cookbook compiled by her granddaughters, and it became a bestseller throughout the West. People loved the simple, hearty food, but more than that, they loved the notes in the margins where Clara had written things like James's favorite, or made this the night he came home from the mountains, or the twins always requested this on their birthday. The recipes were infused with love, and somehow that came through even on the page. James's trapping routes through the high country were eventually mapped and turned into hiking trails, allowing modern adventurers to walk in his footsteps through some of the most beautiful wilderness in Colorado. Markers along the way told stories of his exploits, his knowledge of the land, his respect for nature. Conservation groups used his example to teach about sustainable hunting and trapping, about living in harmony with the wilderness rather than trying to conquer it. But perhaps the greatest legacy Clara and James left was not in landmarks or cookbooks or trails, but in the love they had shown each other and taught their children to show others. Their descendants spread throughout the West and beyond, carrying with them the values instilled by that first generation. Kindness to strangers became a family trait. Every Colter descendant knew that you never turned away someone in need, that you offered food and warmth and assistance without expecting anything in return, because you never knew when that stranger might become family. Hard work was valued not for its own sake, but for what it allowed you to build. Clara and James had worked tirelessly to create a home and a legacy, and their descendants understood that meaningful achievement required sacrifice and dedication. Love was understood to be both choice and feeling, something that required daily attention and effort. The passion Clara and James had felt for each other had been real, but what sustained them through 34 years of marriage was the choice to keep loving even when things were difficult. Respect for the land and the wilderness was paramount. James had taught his children that nature was not something to be dominated, but something to live alongside, to learn from, to honor. That philosophy was passed down and eventually influenced environmental policies throughout Colorado. As the 20th century progressed and the Wild West became history rather than current events, the story of Clara and James took on an almost mythical quality. But their descendants always insisted it was true, every word of it, and they had the letters and diaries and photographs to prove it. In Clara's own hand, in a diary discovered in the 1950s, she had written about that first night. "A stranger came to my door tonight, half frozen and exhausted. I fed him because it was the right thing to do, because Thomas would have wanted me to, because no one should suffer when I have the means to help. I did not know then that I was feeding my future, that this man would become my everything. But even if I had known, I would have done the same. Some things are simply right, and kindness is always the answer." James had been less verbose in his own journals, but one entry from shortly after they married read simply, "Came home today. Clara made roast venison and biscuits, sat on the porch and watched the sunset together. This is everything. This is enough. This is more than I ever dreamed possible." Those simple words, written by a man more comfortable with actions than declarations, captured the essence of their relationship. It was not complicated or dramatic. It was simple, profound, and utterly real. As the 21st century dawned, the town of Colter Springs thrived as a tourist destination, with people coming from around the world to see where the famous love story had unfolded. The original cabin, carefully preserved, drew thousands of visitors each year. People would stand in the small space and try to imagine that February night in 1876, the exhausted man, the widow's kindness, the meal that changed everything. A film was made of their story in 2018, though the family insisted on certain facts being preserved accurately. The movie was a surprise hit, resonating with audiences who hungered for authentic love stories in an increasingly cynical world. The actors who played Clara and James became famous for their chemistry, and both credited the real couple's story with inspiring their performances. Reading their letters, their diaries, seeing how they chose each other every single day, the actress who played Clara said in an interview, that was transformative. It reminded me that real love is not about grand gestures, but about showing up consistently, about choosing your person over and over again. The actor who played James added, "What struck me was how masculine James was, this powerful mountain man, but also how gentle and devoted. He understood that true strength was not about dominance, but about protection and care. That is a lesson modern men need to learn." The film sparked a resurgence of interest in the Wild West era, particularly in the stories of ordinary people who had lived extraordinary lives. Historians began digging deeper into the period, finding more stories like Clara and James's, tales of courage and love and survival that had been overlooked in favor of gunfighters and outlaws. But none of those stories quite captured the public imagination like Clara and James did. Perhaps it was the simplicity of their beginning a hot meal, a warm fire, a moment of kindness extended. Perhaps it was the longevity of their love, 34 years of marriage, in an era when life was hard and uncertain. Perhaps it was the family they had built, the legacy they had left, the values they had embodied. Or perhaps it was simply that their story reminded people of something fundamental and true, that we all need to be seen, to be cared for, to be nourished in body and spirit, and that sometimes the simple act of feeding someone literally and metaphorically can create bonds that last beyond a single lifetime. In Colter Springs, the annual celebration of Clara and James's anniversary had evolved into a week-long festival. There were cooking competitions using Clara's recipes, harmonica contests in James's honor, hiking expeditions along his old trails, and storytelling sessions where the oldest residents shared memories passed down through generations. But the heart of the festival remained the communal meal held on the actual anniversary date. Tables were set up throughout the town square, and everyone contributed dishes. Strangers sat beside neighbors, tourists beside locals, and everyone shared food and stories and laughter. It was exactly what Clara would have wanted, her great-great-granddaughter Sarah observed every year. Clara had believed that food was love made edible, that sitting down to share a meal was an act of communion, that nourishing others was one of the highest callings. This festival embodied all of those beliefs, and every year, without fail, someone would tell the original story. The details might vary slightly in the telling. Some versions emphasize the romance, others the survival aspect, still others the spiritual nourishment, but the core remained constant. A widow, living alone in the wilderness, opened her door to a stranger despite the risk. A mountain man, exhausted and depleted, accepted help despite his fierce independence. She cooked him a hot meal with care and skill. He ate it with gratitude and wonder. In that simple exchange, something profound occurred. Two lonely souls recognized each other. Two wounded hearts began to heal. Two separate lives started to intertwine. The meal nourished his body, giving him strength to survive. But more than that, it nourished his spirit, reminding him that he was worthy of care, that he did not have to face the world alone, that there was still softness and kindness in a harsh world. And in feeding him, Clara nourished her own spirit as well. She remembered her own worth, her capacity for love, her strength and resilience. She stopped merely surviving and began living again. That was the true magic of their story, the reason it resonated across centuries and cultures. It was not about the Wild West or mountain men or frontier life, though those elements provided a compelling backdrop. It was about the fundamental human need for connection, for care, for home. It was about how we save each other, often in small, quiet ways. How a meal shared in kindness can become the foundation of a love that lasts forever. How the simple act of opening your door to someone in need can change the entire trajectory of your life. And it was about choosing love every single day, through hardship and joy, through separation and reunion, through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. Clara and James had chosen each other that first night, and they had kept choosing each other for 34 years, and their descendants kept choosing love for generations after. On warm summer evenings in Colter Springs, you could still find couples sitting on porches throughout the town, talking and laughing as the sun set behind the mountains. The custom had started with Clara and James, but it had spread throughout the community, becoming a symbol of commitment and connection. Those porch conversations were about the small stuff, what happened that day, plans for tomorrow, funny things the kids had said, but they were also about the big stuff, dreams and fears and hopes, challenges and victories, the daily choice to stay connected, to keep talking, to remain present with each other. In a world that moved faster every year, that valued productivity over presence, that often reduced love to swipes and likes and instant gratification, those porch conversations were revolutionary. They were a quiet rebellion, an insistence that real connection took time and attention and consistent effort, just like Clara and James had taught all those years ago. Their graves on the hillside overlooking the ranch had become a pilgrimage site of sorts. People would hike up there, especially couples, and stand before the simple headstones. Many left flowers or small tokens. Some left notes, sharing their own love stories or asking for blessing on their relationships. The family maintained the site carefully, but they allowed the tributes. Clara and James had belonged not just to their descendants, but to everyone who believed in the power of love, the importance of kindness, the possibility of finding your person even in the most unexpected circumstances. And on certain nights, particularly in February when the wind blew cold from the mountains, people swore they could see two figures on that hillside, standing hand in hand looking out over the valley they had loved. A large man and a small woman, their forms slightly translucent in the moonlight, but their love as solid and real as the mountains themselves. Whether it was true or just a romantic legend, no one could say for certain. But it did not really matter. The truth of Clara and James was not in ghost stories or supernatural manifestations. It was in the family they had created, the values they had instilled, the love they had shared and taught others to share. It was in every meal cooked with care for someone you love, in every door open to a stranger in need, in every choice to stay, to work through difficulties, to keep loving even when it is hard, in every evening spent talking on a porch as the sun sets, in every act of kindness that ripples out into the world in ways we can never fully measure. That was their legacy. That was their immortality. And as the story continued to be told, generation after generation, it carried with it a simple but profound message. Feed the people you love, in body and in spirit. Open your door to possibility. Choose kindness. Choose love. Choose each other every single day. Because you never know when a stranger at your door might become the love of your life. You never know when a hot meal might nourish someone's soul. You never know when a simple act of compassion might change everything. Clara and James had not known that cold February night in 1876. They had simply done what felt right in the moment. She had cooked, he had eaten, they had talked, they had seen each other, really seen each other, in a way that transcended their circumstances. And from that simple beginning, they had built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a family that spread across the West, a legacy that continued to inspire long after they were gone. In the end, that is all any of us can hope for, to love well, to be loved in return, to leave the world a little better than we found it, to create ripples of goodness that extend beyond our own brief lives. Clara and James had done all of that and more. They had shown that true love was possible, that kindness mattered, that home was not a place but a person, that we all have the capacity to nourish each other in body and spirit if we only have the courage to try. Their story was not just history. It was a template, a guide, a reminder of what really matters. And as long as people kept telling it, kept learning from it, kept trying to embody the values it represented, Clara and James would never truly die. They would live on in every meal cooked with love, every door opened in kindness, every couple who chose each other daily, every family built on mutual respect and devotion, every person who remembered that we are all connected, that we all need each other, that the simple act of feeding someone body and soul is one of the most powerful things we can do. That was the story of Clara Whitmore and James Colter, the widow and the mountain man, two lonely souls who found each other in the wilderness and created something beautiful that would echo through the ages. And it all started with a hot meal, cooked with care, offered with kindness, received with gratitude, a simple act that nourished not just a body but a spirit, and in doing so, changed two lives forever.